Welcome to our program On the Move. Today we will focus on European migration policies, particularly Germany's migration policies, with my guest, Wiebke Judith. Welcome, Wiebke. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation.
Let me briefly introduce you. Wiebke works as a legal advisor for non-governmental organization NGO Pro Asyl on German and European law and politics. She holds an LLM degree in European and international human rights law and previously worked with Amnesty International in Germany on refugee politics and asylum law. Thanks again for joining me. As you all know, today, this week, actually, marks the 70 years of the Geneva Convention since 1951. In the aftermath of the World War II and in the face of growing political tensions in the United Nations adopted the convention in Geneva in 1951. So the Refugee Convention still plays an important role today as probably one of the only documents that obligate states to provide protection to refugees. Today, according to UN, 82 million people are forcibly displaced, and of which 20 million of these are refugees under the UNHCR mandate. But as we mark the 70th year of the convention, we are globally facing a growing disregard for international law, international cooperation, and protection of people in need, especially under the increasingly so under the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, Greece's migration ministry, on the day of the 70th year anniversary of the convention, the only thing, as far as I know, they wrote was that they announced Turkey to take 1,908 refugees back, which is quite telling about where we are today. So my questions to you will address today some of the growing concerns on migration in Turkey. And for our audiences, it should be clear from the bio that I've read as well is that you don't represent Germany or Europe. You are a human rights defender, and Pro Asyl very openly criticizes actually any human rights violations, refugee rights violations in Europe. So to start, I've been arguing about this for a while now, and it's getting a bit old to me, but when we looked at the, for example, EU-Turkey statement, I have argued that it was a short-sighted and politically motivated response. And after, when EU resumed negotiations with Turkey to curb irregular migration to Western Europe, which resulted in the 2016 EU-Turkey statement, which we keep saying the deal, basically. And at that time, one of the architects of the deals, of the statement, Gerald Knaus, argues that at a time of, in quotation, crisis, a plan was needed, first to prevent the deaths at the Aegean Sea and to ensure a humanitarian solution as opposed to the anti-migrant far-right politics represented by the Hungarian Prime Minister Orban. However, it's been more than 5 years since the deal, and I believe that European Union is actually at risk of turning into its own dreadful threat. Because when we, for example, look at the Migration Pact released in 2020, it defines EU's approach to migration management, and it seems to have focused more on Orban's policies of iron fences, detention centers, and return procedures, rather than what we remember in 2015, Merkel's call for responsibility sharing. We can do this. Not to speak highly of Merkel, but the situation and the image that it showed. So, but after 16 years of rule, Merkel will retire after Germany's 2021 fall elections. And so I want to directly ask you how you see the coming elections and how the leadership change in Germany, both for the Chancellor and the federal government, I assume, might affect Germany's role on EU migration policies. here, if you like, you can also comment on, the election programs of other parties and so forth. But I understand this is speculative, but I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a question we're all asking ourselves a bit. What is going to happen after September? I think at the moment it's still a bit unclear how things are really going to develop. So far, migration has actually not played a huge role in the German election campaign so far, or in the debates. As you know, we've had terrible floods, for example. So those topics have, of course, been more on the top of the agenda. But I think also because of this, it's still quite unforeseeable, really, how the results are going to be in the fall. But either way, we know that, of course, Germany has played a really crucial role in German migration policies, especially in 2015 and the years after. So for sure, whatever happens in Berlin also plays a role what happens in Brussels. And I think the one thing with Angela Merkel, our still current chancellor, of course, is that she had a lot of experience. So what one hears, at least, she had certain, talents in bringing people together on certain issues. And of course, at least in 2015, and also actually not really what was usually seen as her character, she took a strong stance, and she did say, we have to protect people. If we can't even agree on protecting people fleeing from war, civil war, torture, then this is not really what she believes in anymore. So I do think this was, of course, a crucial statement. At the same time, this has never overall reflected her policy or our government policy in total. You mentioned the EU-Turkey deal, which had been primarily negotiated, amongst others, by Angela Merkel. And the goal of that was always to reduce the amount of people that arrive in Greece and then in the end in Germany. And we've also seen a lot of restrictions in our domestic asylum and residency law in the past years. So yeah, as I said, it is very speculative, of course. At least currently still, what is a bit expected that the Green Party is going to play a bigger role possibly after the elections, because they are having still quite high polls. And on their policy papers, a lot is actually pretty good when it comes to migration policies. They're very clear on denouncing also, for example, the EU-Turkey deal, in undermining international refugee law, in creating, of course, the terrible situations on Moria, in being more of a containment policy than actually being primarily about supporting Turkey in receiving refugees and also taking in refugees from Turkey to Europe. But, and I think this is one of always the crucial questions, it's one of the things what is written on the paper. It's another thing what is going to be important during coalition talks. Who is going to have what type of position in a future government? I think if the Conservative Party, so Merkel's party, if they form part of the government, they will absolutely want to keep the Ministry of Interior. And what we have seen in general in the past is that the Ministry of Interior basically defines all of migration policies. So even in like foreign policies, European policies, it always feels like it's more the Ministry of Interior calling the shots and less actually, for example, the Office of Foreign Affairs.
But what about, the chancellor? Like, how crucial is the role of the chancellor in this case? And how do you see, for example, in relationship to changing, of course, as you said, Greens, for example, we don't know how it will actually happen in implication when it comes to action. Words and action are quite different things when we look at politicians overall, especially before the elections. But after 6 years of Merkel's kind of stable politics on migration to a certain extent, how can we, what kind of, as Pro Asyl, for example, what are the things that you're preparing for, in a sense, of potential change? What will be the expected challenges of migration issues in Germany after the elections you expect? What are the things you foresee?
Yeah. I mean, in general, of course, in Germany, the chancellor, it is a crucial role. It's not quite as in the in the US, where it's a presidential system, but still, in the end, of course, the chancellor, also when there is disagreement in a coalition, at some point, the chancellor can also just take a decision to a certain extent. Yeah, it is a bit difficult to say, to be honest, because I think in Germany, it is primarily focused on what is happening in the EU in general. In Germany, we don't really have a lot of new arrivals of asylum seekers. Actually, the numbers are really, really low. So domestically, there is often a debate on forced returns, such as to Afghanistan, for example, which we're probably still going to get to in our talk. And otherwise, it really focuses on the European debate. And next to Angela Merkel, also our Minister of Interior, Horst Seehofer, is, as far as I think, not going to run again to become a minister. So also, and he was always a bit more on the opposite side of Merkel, right, in this regard. So they used to have a huge fight within the government, especially amongst the two of them. So he was always on the more tougher spectrum, especially when it comes into taking vulnerable people from Greece. So I do think, of course, having different people in those positions, it can lead to more perhaps proactive actions from Germany again, especially when it comes to just saying, okay, we see that there's a horrible situation on the Greek islands. We will take in people from there, because this was really blocked a lot by Horst Seehofer as well. But then on the other hand, sure, Angela Merkel also had a certain position of influence, I think, within the EU that also came from her being chancellor for so long and from having that experience. So it could, of course, also be a bit that Germany is not going to have the same voice immediately again. But it's still, of course, always going to be an influential country in the EU. But this is also, again, a bit always the situation in the EU, that it's, of course, on not just Germany, but many member states that have strong opinions on migration. And unfortunately, since 2015, but also after the EU-Turkey deal, it has not led to actually reduce far-right or very conservative views and very restrictive views on migration, but rather I feel that we're in a more restrictive situation now with countries like Austria, Denmark, the Netherlands, really not being open even to relocate people from Greek islands, for example, into having very strict domestic laws, in the case of Denmark, even violating international law. So we have seen, more and more deterioration when it comes to different governments on the protection level.
Yeah, I mean, so far, despite the challenges on, at least on discourse scale, Germany was trying to at least push for responsibility sharing and not to shoulder all the responsibility on Germany. But I do worry about, not that Germany has done an amazing job previously, which wasn't true, definitely, especially when we look at relocations from Greece, when we look at family reunifications and so forth, which Pro Asyl really works on, is very problematic. But anyways, we'll see. So let me continue a little bit.
Yes. Just to say, perhaps I absolutely agree, and we are very critical of Germany's role, but one still has to say that Germany was the country taking in most people from Greece again. So there is a problem that unfortunately other member states are also not living up to their potential. So yeah, that would be really a problem if Germany would be even less proactive. I do hope that perhaps it's going to be more proactive after the elections, but let's see.
Yeah. I want to continue with a bit more with Merkel. Merkel recently praised Turkey for hosting large numbers of Syrians as part of the EU-Turkey agreement. She said that she would want to, stay in good relations, close relations with Ankara, but did not anticipate Turkish membership to the EU, which, as you know, which was actually part of was an element of the EU-Turkey statement that Turkey's accession process to the EU was going to be supported. And she said, in quote, "I would like this agreement on migrants and refugees with Turkey to continue. This is the best for people." And recently also, Austrian Prime Minister Kurz said that Turkey is a better place for Afghans. But in Anadolu Agency, the Turkish state as a response, the Turkish sponsored news agency, Anadolu Agency, as a response to Merkel's, said also that Turkey also favors renewing the deal. However, it has complained that while it's upheld its end of the pact, the EU did not, including not fully providing the 6 billion in aid and backing away from its political commitments, like what Merkel just recently said. So from our perspective, EU in general, but Germany also for sure, wants to renew the EU-Turkey deal. And this is merely based on financial aid. And this is what we have been seeing not only in Turkey, but in other countries, like in other third countries that Europe tries to externalize migration. EU pays for the expenses and Turkey holds the refugees within its territories. And some migration studies scholars even say that it costs, in quote, less to keep refugees outside of, the EU. But very recently in Turkey, we see a surge of very serious reactions, particularly from the oppositional parties. For example, the leader of the main oppositional party severely criticized EU and Merkel for turning, in quotation, I'd say, for turning Turkey into an open-air prison for millions of refugees. And he added that we hear that Europe is preparing for the second bribery package for us to host new waves of immigrants. And he said, never again. And as a response to what the Austrian Prime Minister said, another oppositional party leader said, let's give them the money and Austria keep the refugees. So within the scenario that we're in now, how do you see the future of EU-Turkey deal, especially after the elections in Germany? And do you think that Turkey can hold a stronger bargaining position in future negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we've seen that since 2016, since that deal was struck, that the EU has always tried to look for new opportunities to collaborate with third countries in a way that in the end prevents people from arriving in Europe. I think this is just a very clear policy, and this is also basically the only part of refugee policy or migration policy where European leaders can agree on. And I think this is the crucial point, because the EU has failed internally in coming up with a comprehensive protection strategy to show solidarity towards the people concerned, but also amongst each other. So the only thing that they can agree on is to look outside of the EU, often I think neglecting actually the interest also of those countries, which I think really is exemplified by what you just said. But we see similar, things not on the same level with Turkey, but, with Tunisia or Morocco. So the EU really tries to replicate also those type of deals. It's also something a lot of German politicians say very openly, that they would like to replicate such a deal with Turkey, also with other countries, and that, yes, they definitely want to. Yeah.
Isn't the EU-Turkey statement seen as a blueprint, which Amnesty very openly criticized as well?
I do think it's absolutely seen as a blueprint. If in the details it may differ, but I think the logic was always, we give money, we can send people back. And this is, of course, where European governments and also German government or politicians criticize Turkey, that they have not actually accepted people from Greece, from the Greek islands, in how it was constructed at the beginning, because there are, of course, many, many people, or many Syrians so far, who have been rejected or their asylum claims have been rejected as inadmissible on the Greek islands, which we think is unlawful. It should not happen. But this is the situation at the moment. So what is really crucial for, I think, the European counterpart and the German counterpart, they want Turkey to start taking back the people. And then the second thing is to control the borders in a way that people don't actually manage to leave Turkey, basically in the direction of Europe. I think those are the two main things that they would really want. But on the other hand, I think that the main thing that they offer, or that they can offer at this point, is financial support or money.
But could we, I mean, this is obviously not fair, right? In a sense, we'll pay. And, you know, even I mean, this is not fair in terms of international politics. That's put aside. All the people who have reached to Europe are also denied the asylum that they denied the protection in Europe as well.
Exactly. And this is a huge problem. I mean, at the moment, a lot of people are just in limbo because basically Europe doesn't give them protection. Turkey doesn't take them back. But primarily also their living situation in Turkey would not necessarily be good, as far as we know from reports. So this is, I think, a bit where it gets very complicated, because of course Turkey has done a lot to take in refugees, and we should of course, you know, really make that clear that it has done more than any country in the EU. But on the same level, the circumstances for Syrian or Afghan refugees are not necessarily safe and are not being able to live in like good living circumstances, which according to EU asylum law means that you cannot send them back to Turkey. Like, this is one of the really irritating things from the start, that the law is pretty clear that Turkey should not be considered a safe third country, also because Turkey has not fully ratified the refugee convention, at least not with regard to the necessary country of origins. But nevertheless, this is the official policy also from the German government, that they do say they consider Turkey to be a safe third country and that you can send people back there. And this is one of the major things I think we would have to change to perhaps also get on a bit of a more fair footing with Turkey too, to say, yes, sure, the EU should support Turkey, you know, in receiving refugees, but it should never be out of the question that, of course, the EU should also take in refugees, give them protection when they're here. And of course, the best would be that proactively resettle Syrian, Afghan, or also Iraqi refugees from Turkey to Europe, so they don't have to make the dangerous crossing.
Yeah. On that note, I think, for example, let's say Turkey said, we don't want your money and we don't want to sign or agree into another deal. Either take the refugees or we're sending them back. If Turkey, just in case, said that and even made the legal amendments, you know, at the moment, Turkey has, you know, temporary protection provided only to Syrians. Let's say they even did legal changes. Not that I expect any of these things, but I fear of the future of you know, refugees in Turkey. So in that sense, is there a plan B for Europe, or is the only plan paying for it?
I think that's the problem. I don't really see a plan B at this point, because I think the plan B would mean to actually make a consistent and coherent migration policy or asylum policy within the EU, especially when it comes to reception capacity, and making sure that, yes, we can take in people. And of course, we can. Like, this is one of the things, right? It has never been a crisis of capacity. It has always been a crisis of responsibility and like a lack of political will. So if the EU would say, yes, we believe that this is part of our core values, which technically it should be, and we are actually living up to our own standards, yes, the EU could take in, I mean, it's always difficult to say exactly, but a big number of refugees, and could definitely also alleviate pressure from Turkey. Unfortunately, at this moment, and this is really the political situation, not, I think, the factual situation that much, is that I don't really see, even if it would come to that point, that Turkey would say, well, we are not accepting any, you know, we will push back heavily to Syria, for example, or also to, well, it happens to Afghanistan too, of course. I don't really see that there would be a major change in European policy at this point.
In our previous conversations, I think you've noted a little bit, but does Turkey have a strong position in bargaining the EU-Turkey?
I think so, yes.
But how would you define that strength?
Well, I think the problem is that the EU has made itself so reliant on the neighboring countries in that topic of migration, that it has to work for the EU. Like there is not really, as I said, there doesn't really seem to be much of a plan B at the moment, you know, with the current governments in power. So Turkey, I think, could really ask for a lot. There are certainly limits when it comes to other questions that are also really high on the political agenda in certain countries or in the EU. But I mean, we have seen this also this year with Morocco and Spain, right? How really migration can be used to actively pressure a EU country by saying, okay, we don't like what you're doing, so we're punishing you by opening borders. And this is a really problematic development, of course, on both sides. Refugees and migrants, they should not be used as like a political, toy, basically, and pressure point. But it is also a bit part of the EU policy that they have put themselves now in this situation.
We had the same issue when we were talking about what happened in Ceuta this year.
Exactly.
Despite, the EU-Turkey deal is an agreement, wording, I guess, to hold refugees, which there are similar agreements with Morocco and Spain and so forth. But do these third countries, by international law, are required to stop irregular departures? Like, is this within the international law? Or I mean, at the end of it, what happens is refugees' rights are violated, refugees die en route, refugees are being targeted. So in the end, this is most detrimental to the refugees. But as we saw in the case of Turkey so-called opening its borders at the beginning of 2020 and recently in Ceuta, what is the international obligation of these third countries at the borders of Europe in terms of borders?
I don't think that there is as such the obligation of them. One can even argue, sure, they have the right to control their borders, but there is a human right to leave a country, you know? So, and this comes really also from, of course, history with the Soviet Union or communist countries where it was prohibited for citizens to leave their countries. But so to actively prevent people, to leave a country, like that is actually, from a human rights perspective, hugely problematic. And I think then the question is more what happens on the other side, right? So what happens at the EU border? And this is really what we've seen between Turkey and Greece as well. And from a law perspective, again, surely Greece has the right to control their borders. But if a person says that they're in need of protection, there is a legal obligation to process that claim. And it's quite scary how much this principle is being violated at EU's borders every day, basically today, and quite openly. And this is such a fundamental principle. And still we see that even this kind of principle is not being respected anymore. And not even that, but also how the pushbacks are being conducted is very violent. And this is a very scary development. So I think this is even more the problem, a bit looking at that border and seeing how this works at the moment.
Definitely. At the moment within European politics, when we speak of resettlement, the focus is usually on the Greek islands or Greece. So within the EU, once refugees arrive, responsibility sharing becomes at least a more possible debate, not maybe in action, but a debate. But what about resettlement from Turkey to Europe? How do you think there's a possibility of resettling more people from Turkey to Europe? Because since the deal, as far as I know, at most 29,000 Syrians, which is way below the anticipated people, are resettled from Turkey to EU. And also in Turkey, there is this perception, real or not real, that EU, when they are resettling refugees from Turkey, are doing a very selective procedure where they are looking into, when they are vetting, not only just security measures, but also looking at criteria like qualified and skilled refugees, rather than, you know, like vulnerability status and other criteria, or just mainly taking in people by line, you know, in order. So how do you see this resettlement procedure from Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, right, the resettlement part, it was also part of the original deal. I think what they originally said was for each person returned, the EU would take 1 Syrian refugee.
Which was on its own a human rights violation.
And a very, very problematic concept, for sure. And of course, this is also not how it has worked in practice. But there has been, so there has been some resettlement. And in general, of course, there is the UN resettlement program, and, you know, EU countries do participate in that. So it's not only Turkey where people are resettled from, but it's on a very, very low level in general, the UN resettlement program. And it's something that, you know, many organizations in Germany, but I'm sure also in other European countries, have advocated for a long time, to make sure that there are some safe and legal routes to Europe, because otherwise, you know, asylum always depends on first risking your life, which in itself, you know, is a horrible type of situation. So there should definitely be more resettlement. Technically, it should, of course, depend on vulnerability criteria. I'm not an expert on how this is conducted in Turkey, so I don't want to say something, you know, which I can't really testify to. I think in general, a problem of these procedures is often that they're quite intransparent. And for the people concerned, especially for the people concerned, it's quite intransparent. And it's, of course, always a bit like a humanitarian type of action. It's not the legal right, like we have it, you know, when a person is here, or that they can appeal, for example, if they're rejected on security grounds, but that, you know, perhaps it's a person with the same name that is somehow in some kind of database. So there are a lot of issues like that around it. But perhaps more in general, I think it would be absolutely smart for the EU to do more resettlement from Turkey, because they always complain they do not have the control and they want to know who is coming to Europe. This is how they could, right? This is the way to go then. Plus, they would actually alleviate some pressure if it's, you know, on a higher scale, because if Turkey has 5,000 refugees, then, you know, taking a few hundred or like a few thousand, that doesn't really cut it for Turkey, right? So this is understandable too. And especially now looking to what happens in Afghanistan, I think not only focusing on Syrian refugees also doesn't really do the situation justice. And how I understand it is that also for Afghan people in Turkey, basically the only status is with something of a view to resettlement, but which then in practice, it's just not a realistic prospect for anyone, especially because the focus of resettlement has been so much on Syrian refugees.
And it's not just of Afghans, you know, there's a lot of Africans and Iranians, Iraqis, all sorts of, I mean, even the fact that EU-Turkey deal is merely based on Syrians, it also disabled already existing Afghans, for example, in Turkey, being able to reach more protection. And even the numbers of unregistered Afghans is quite high, as you know, in Turkey, which not only disables them from reaching services in Turkey, but also disables them from seeking protection in third countries where they can be resettled, because to be resettled somewhere else, they first need to be registered.
Yes, exactly. I think for us, just one of the points is it always has to be from like looking from the European perspective, it has to be the two things, right? We have to do more resettlement and other safe and legal ways to actually get here. But then we also have to protect the individual right to seek asylum when you get here spontaneously, basically on your own accord. Because this is, of course, a bit of a trend. We also see that many people would like to say, oh, we only, you know, do resettlement, basically, and we completely shut our borders. Especially now, you know, as you said, it's the 17th anniversary of the Refugee Convention. And, you know, the crucial thing is the individual right to seek asylum as well.
Yeah. Before I move on to our final question on final issues on Afghanistan, I want to ask one final thing. As part, you know, you've worked in really, you are also working in very significant NGOs in Germany. You know, Amnesty International, Pro Asyl. These are very significant, not power, I don't know if to say powerful is enough, but very well respected organizations. And, they've been critical of the EU-Turkey deal since the day one. And now we're in the phase of renewing this so-called blueprint. How do the NGOs in Germany are taking a stand, and how are they, managing these? How are they, how are they facing these challenges of, stopping these violations?
Yeah, I do think in Germany, at least, we have a very strong civil society in this field in general, and there is a consensus that the EU-Turkey deal, as it was done back then and how it is supposed to be revitalized, is not only a bad idea, but it's in violation of international norms. It runs foul of like an international solidarity aspect. And that it has directly created the horrible situations in Moria and in other Greek refugee camps. So there has been in general a lot of mobilization in Germany around the Greek islands, and to say that, Germany should take in people from the islands. But of course, that always comes together with saying, well, we have to also look at the core of the problem. And there it is also the EU-Turkey deal, and in general, the lack of political will on the European level. We just need better policy. So I do think, I don't want to say it's completely unique in Germany also in relation to other EU countries, but I do think there is a exceptionally strong civil society on this account, perhaps also because there is, of course, a big experience now with taking in refugees, and many people, frankly, don't really see the problem in that, they see how it has worked. And because if people who have experienced this sort of trauma, who have made the dangerous crossing, who perhaps have been on a Greek island, you just understand perhaps better how, that we need to help the people, and that it's also a situation of rights. And so the civil society is pretty vocal in Germany on this. There is also, of course, talks with politicians, etc. Yes.
But again, for practicality reasons, which is reasonable, that this is highly focused on EU territories.
Mm-hmm.
It's much less activism to look at
Yes.
the conditions in Turkey, to support Turkish activists and refugee rights. Standpoint in Turkey remains lacking in a sense, I think.
Yeah, I think this is a bit where we often also see a bit our role, because it's a bit natural that, people see the pictures from Moria and are like, oh, we want to help there. And I think we are always now, as a bit also policy organization, we're like, yes, absolutely. But in the bigger picture, we also really need to look at what's happening in Turkey. We need to look at the policy context, and to also really think about what's happening in Turkey.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Afghanistan. So as one of the main topics lately, as NATO leaves Afghanistan, we are facing a serious increase in numbers of Afghans trying to or urging to leave the country in fear of Taliban's rule. Afghan government recently issued a statement asking countries not to return asylum seekers and refugees back to Afghanistan, one for security reasons, second for COVID reasons. And a few North European countries responded to this and agreed to it. What is Germany's stand on deportations back to Afghanistan at the moment?
Yeah, unfortunately, Germany still holds the position, at least publicly, that they do want to continue to return. We know there is a scheduled flight in August. So for some time now, Germany does do monthly returns to Afghanistan, which we have always criticized, because the security situation and the conflict has never died in Afghanistan. So it has always been one of the highest conflict countries in the world in the last years. But of course, now what we see is really escalating. Also, Germany has pulled out its troops at some weeks ago now. So we, of course, see also an extra responsibility for Germany on this ground to not pull out your troops, but then send people back while it's completely unclear what is going to happen on the ground. There are certain leaks to what internally they are discussing, and which basically show how worried they are actually about the situation, and how they do think that the Taliban is going to make like a lot of progress, even more than they already have since NATO troops pulled out. And yes, of course, one of the things we see is that people flee already to Turkey. And of course, the question, which was already discussed to a certain level in the media, will the people also try to come to Europe, which would be very understandable. And I think the question should just be, how can we prepare for that, not how can we prevent it. And then, we already talked about proactive measures like resettlement.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that now makes me think is like recently, Greek governments with no responsibility have evacuated the large numbers of people from the islands. Today on Lesbos Island, we have less than 5,000 people, which is still quite a lot, but much less than what we had 2 years or 1.5 years ago. Yeah. But they have no protection on the mainland. They are on the streets, and this is maybe a topic of another conversation. But what we see lately is that a lot of the discussions by the EU Commission in Greek authorities that most of the recent arrivals, even before the surge of the war in Afghanistan, were Afghans. The majority of the residents of Moria, 70% of them almost, were from Afghanistan. And there is this sense that they were like no longer entitled to international protection, and they are denied protection. So my one question is like, what is the protection rate of Afghans in Germany? But with this change, do you think that there will be any impact on asylum applications of Afghans in Europe?
Yeah. So unfortunately, German protection rates of Afghans have been pretty low in the last years, but their success rate at the courts is rather high, which I think there is at around 60% or so than the protection rate after the court, like after the first instance. But we have also just gotten a judgment this year from the European Court of Justice saying that actually even the German jurisprudence was way too strict with regard to Afghanistan. So we actually hope or expect there also to be somewhat of a change. And then, of course, with the recent developments already with COVID, actually, we have seen first court decisions which have said, well, even, like young men, you cannot return to a situation like this at the moment in Afghanistan. And I do think, or I expect that this is also going to be even more the case now with the escalating conflict. Greece, at least to my knowledge, always had actually a higher recognition rate when it comes to Afghan people than Germany. But of course, what we are very worried about was the recent decision to say that also for Afghan and also for Pakistanis, Somalis, and Bangladeshis, I think, that they are going to also consider Turkey as a safe third country. And this is really where it shows the problem, like the problem of this concept is that the whole question, what happens in Afghanistan, is excluded at that point. So it's only about, can you return them to Turkey? Is it safe in Turkey? And not what actually happens in the country. So this is really worrying. Let's see how it develops in Greece. But yeah, I do think in Germany, we like the forced returns have to stop. The people need to get some protection status. Often they only have a what's called tolerated stay, which basically gives you very, very few rights. Sometimes not even the right to work or do to study or do an apprenticeship. And then, of course, another high discussion topic is how to get former staff basically out of Afghanistan.
Yeah,
so people who have worked for the German military.
That was one of my next questions, because in the United States, this is an ongoing discussion, because there's so many thousands of Afghans who have helped the US soldiers and other US bureaucratic staff, which is true for many other NATO allies on that were in Afghanistan. And that's also particularly resettlement, but also US is discussing about if they can't bring them all home to US, making sure that they get out of Afghanistan to another safe country, which again puts on the table the same question, like, where is that country?
Yeah, I mean, that part of the debate we don't have in Germany right now. There is a program for former staff members that they can basically apply, that they say they are at risk. At the beginning, it was pretty restricted, so only people who worked for German troops, for example, in the last 2 years. There was a lot of advocacy also on our behalf, and that was dropped, fortunately. And there's still a lot of questions, concerning, for example, people who worked for subcontractors and these kind of things, because of course for the Taliban, that doesn't matter if it's like the official troops or if it's like a subcontractor. So this is still really tricky. But at the moment, we're actually particularly worried about how can the people get out? Like if they can't get out, then these criteria don't even matter that much at this point. So there's a strong advocacy also to try to, literally send a charter plane or so, right? I mean, they do this for the return flights. They could do it the other way around, and they should. There is an obligation to protect those people.
Yeah, definitely. So before we close, within this framework that we're facing today, I mean, I'm quite a pessimist, and I fear we are moving towards an even darker period on migration policies, not only in Europe, but globally. From Myanmar to, Guatemala, we have very serious human rights violations against people on the move. So how do you see the first and foremost challenges on migration policies in Europe that, as human rights organizations and human rights defenders, we need to push? What should be our priorities?
I think our priority has to be access to Europe. We can have really high standards on paper. If people are actively prevented from reaching Europe, then this doesn't count anymore. It's not really worth it. Or like the paper is not worth what was written on it, basically. So access to Europe is really key. Of course, making that as safe as possible. It's an absolute, not even tragedy, because that sounds like it's not, basically on purpose, but it's a catastrophe what has been happening at Europe's borders for years now. We don't really talk so much about the Mediterranean at the moment, but there are also still people drowning. Yeah. So this is a constant situation that is unbearable. And I think the other question is about revitalizing the need to show responsibility and to live up to that. And that it's not only a value, but a right, but also to see it still part of our European values, to say we protect human rights. So that also means at the border. And we protect people who need protection when they come here. And I think that also really means that we don't look to do deals with third countries to push people back, or to say, Turkey is safe and we can send them there because we can give them protection. So why is this even the first thing that is being discussed?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I guess we reiterate people before borders as usual. And I appreciate your work and Pro Asyl's work and joining me here today. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thanks to everyone who watched us today. And I'll see you in the next program on the move. Have a good Sunday. Thanks.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.